Many of you will know that a while ago I went to the University of St Andrews, and that is where I did my first degree, up on the eastern coast of Scotland. And I have many stories that I can tell you from there. After that, about 7 years after I started at St Andrews, I returned to the University of Manchester, where I did an education qualification for a year. Although both of those universities taught me a lot, both on the official subject matter and all the stuff around, I think I actually started university many, many years before I went to St Andrews, just before my 19th birthday. Because I believe that the most important university that I have ever been to is the University of Life. I believe, and I'm going to illustrate, give you a few examples at any rate, that I am a lifelong learner. And this has probably happened because both of my parents are educators. My father gave up a job as a system analyst in 1968 for totally ridiculous reasons and moved into further education. My mother has been an infant school teacher fundamentally all of her working life. And much of that time she has taught in some fairly poor areas. Areas where certainly the pupils, and in many cases I think the parents, would have scored really fairly lowly on the Australian, and I'm sure there is a British equivalent, core skills framework. But nevertheless, my mother was successful, and I think a lot of that has rubbed off onto me. When I think back, I have learned an awful lot from a lot of people. I'm going to share some of those examples with you today and how I think they have benefited me and probably therefore benefited some of the other people with whom I interact. A very early memory of teaching goes back to when I was probably 7, and it was the day before decimalisation came in to Britain. And my mother and my brother, who is 18 months younger than me, and I were going into Liverpool by train. My mother obviously bought tickets, and because decimalisation was coming in the following day, the change from the tickets that she got was not in pound, shilling and pence, which of course was still the current currency, but she was given change in decimal money. And I can picture her to this day sitting opposite Nick and me. Nick is my brother. And with the money in her hand, showing us the coins and how from the following day we would be using those coins and not the coins that we were familiar with insofar as a 7- and 5-year-old would be familiar with any coins. So just the technique that she used in that experience, where she took advantage of the moment, that I don't think she knew ahead of time that the change would be this newfangled decimal currency, but nevertheless, she had us with her and she taught us an appropriate lesson with the tools that she had available. Another lesson that sticks hard in my mind is somebody who I was very close friends with at university, who was doing medicine, and my first degree, experimental pathology, overlapped quite a lot with the medical course. And I was with David when some of the results came out. And that particular term, David was doing head and neck anatomy as one of the courses. We went together to get our results, and David had scored 97% in the head and neck exam. Now, 97%, I think you would all agree, is a good mark, in fact, possibly even an excellent mark in anyone's book. Let me tell you how this was achieved. Because David did not achieve 97 positive marks. Anatomy exams then, and I believe now in the good medical schools, are multiple choice, true, false, and they are negatively marked. So that exam, David would have had a whole series of statements, and I will give a very, very simple example. Obviously far, far simpler than an undergrad medic. But an example from head and neck. The statement might be, in the human body, the eyes are above the nose. True, false. If you give the right answer to that question, you get 1 mark. If you are confused and you don't know the relevant anatomy, you don't get 0. You don't get -1. You get -2. So I'd now like you to consider that 97% mark, and acknowledging that the example I gave you was an awful lot simpler than the questions around skeleton structure, muscles, nerves, blood supply, and so on. And I asked David how on earth he had achieved 97%. And I remember his reply to this day. His reply was, give me some plasticine and I will make you a model of the human head and neck. So the lesson for me from that whole experience, as well as being friends with David over an extended period of time, was to do well, you need to really learn the detail. Because, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, anybody who can model the human head and neck at the level that a medic needs to know it with plasticine is going to find questions of the sort, is this blood vessel above, below, lateral, distal, and so on to some other structure, relatively easy because they have that model and they're just looking at it. Another lesson that has served me well from my days at St Andrews was an early lecture in histology. And histology is the structure of cells, so a key part of anatomy and other medical subjects. We all went into the lecture theatre, so probably there were 100+ students in there, including a relatively small group of my course. And our first lecture from Dr. John Frame was on inflammation. I firmly believe that John Frame, in that 45-minute lecture, took no more than 2 breaths. He took a deep breath at the beginning of the lecture, and then he just went on and 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 on, and 45 minutes later he stopped. No diagrams, no notes except what we took ourselves, and and we were taking bets at the end of the lecture of just how many times had John drawn breath in that time. So they are some of the lessons that I have learned in the University of Life. But I think perhaps the most important lessons that I've learned, and the ones that have put me in the strongest position for where I am now, have been in yet another university, although perhaps it is a campus of the University of Life, I'm not sure. And this university is the University of Hard Knocks. I have spent a fairly significant amount of my life taking courses. Whether or not I've learned, that is seriously questionable. But I have certainly taken a number of courses in the University of Hard Knocks. Let me share some of those courses or key lessons with you. Probably the major one comes from running a business, and I have been fundamentally self-employed since I was, well, from 30-something years now. So I can say hand on heart that I have absolutely earned every penny, pound, cent, dollar that I have ever spent. Because not only has the money come into me, but it has come in for services that I have sold. So the whole lot has gone through, and through my own efforts. So the lessons that I have learned. Firstly, running a business with very little cash or cash flow is very, very challenging. And I have done that. I have spent many months where I am literally jiggling things around and working out what can be paid and what can't, and then finding reasons that are vaguely palatable to the person who is owed the money in terms of paying them. I have certainly, within the School of Hard Knocks, come up a little bit by applying some of those other lessons. So that learning stuff in detail and making sure that you know every nuance of it, that has served me well. Not least of which, I have used that both to pass a number of Microsoft exams and to teach other people how to pass Microsoft exams. And pass those exams so they not only pass the exam, which obviously is part of it, but they have got the information so that they can take that and apply it to their professional life. Other lessons that I have learned in the School of Hard Knocks is all about planning. I vividly remember, given what I'm doing today, this definitely shows an improvement over the last number of years, where when I was about 15, I had failed to finish some homework. And as luck would have it, School of Hard Knocks being where I was, I got asked to read out my homework. So the first 3 quarters were great. I read it out. And then I tried to ad-lib the bit that I hadn't done. Should we say it didn't work? And it was obvious both to the teacher and to the remainder of the class that I had not finished my homework. And I paid the price. So time management and preparation are lessons that I have got from the School of Hard Knocks. There are many, many more lessons that have come from the School of Hard Knocks. There are many more lessons that I have learnt in the University of Life. And overall, I think I am more thankful for having gone to the University of Life, and I probably started there half a century or more ago. I doubt whether I will ever graduate from the University of Life, or at least I won't be around to experience the graduation. But I do hope that I have largely graduated from the School of Hard Knocks. Let's hope that I have taken those lessons, that I have internalised them and applied them, and that the University of Hard Knocks is now behind me.